Hello and welcome to this episode in our Stories from the Strongroom series. In this episode we take a journey along Hull's Holderness Road. Beginning with its origins, the journey looks back at 800 years of Holderness Road's history to its present day. All the images used in this episode are available to view along with many more relating to Holderness Road here at the Hull History Centre. We hope you enjoy this talk. Today Holderness Road is a means of getting from A to B, perhaps a trip to the coast, while for others it is just another one of Hull's busy roads to navigate during rush hour. For some, Holderness Road is used for its shopping facilities or visiting East Park, whilst also being home for thousands of residents. In this episode in our series from the Strongroom, we look at the history of Holderness Road, taking a journey along its length from Drypool towards Bilton, exploring its origins, history and changes over the last 800 years. The origins of Holderness Road lay in the 13th century, and quite possibly earlier. Sayer, Lord of Sutton, granted the nuns of Swine Priory access from Bilton to Drypool in 1260. This route likely followed what we know of Holderness Road today. The first real provision for a road east of Hull came soon after Edward I acquired the town of Hull. Prior to this, travel within Holderness was done by boat. For example, the network of dykes and ditches constructed by the monks of Mewes Abbey were used not only to drain the lands and create arable land, these drains and dykes also conveyed people and goods. What became Holderness Road was known as the King's Highway. It was 40 feet wide and ran from the River Hull at Drypool through Southcoats to Bilton Bridge, providing a link with Holderness and later the important agricultural lands beyond. It is believed the kink on Holderness Road at its junction with Summergangs Road occurred due to the road bending around the Chapel of St Mary's at Southcoats, which is believed to have stood on what is the former Crown Inn. The Chapel of St Mary's dates back to the 13th century but has since long gone. For centuries, Holderness Road was in a poor state of repair. In 1373 the road from Drypool to Heddon was too deep in mud to be repaired. In 1577 all roads to Hull, particularly the Holderness Road, were so bad that the corporation was forced to store corn to ensure supplies were maintained in case of scarcity. Such was Holderness Road's importance, in 1603 the corporation permitted the people of Drypool and Southcoats to make a collection in Hull towards the repair of the Holderness Road. The second half of the 19th century saw improvements across the country's existing road network with the turnpiking of roads. Travellers were charged a toll for its use, which in turn paid for the upkeep of the road. Being the principal road between Hull and Holderness, Holderness Road was turnpiked in 1745. A toll house or bar was at Summergangs Gate adjoining Summer Ings. This was located along what is now Holderness Road's junction with Ings Road. A second toll bar was established at Whiton, where the road forks off to Sprotely and Preston. Today, Heddon Road is used by many as the principal route to Heddon. But prior to its construction in 1830, those wanting to access Heddon and beyond, Holderness Road was the principal route, taking travellers through Bilton, Preston and on to Heddon. From here, travellers would use other routes to access Thorngunball, Burstwick, Patterington and beyond. Mileposts or stones were located along its length. The first mile was measured from North Bridge, close to the Brunswick Chapel, located by Durham Street. At the junction with Ings Road and Holderness Road was a second milestone, marking 2 miles to Hull. A replica replaces the original, which is now set into the row of shops at the junction. Just beyond the Diadem roundabout, marking 3 miles to Hull, is another milestone. Sadly, been exposed to the elements for the last 2.5 centuries, the inscription is all but gone, with just Hull able to be made out. Another milestone can be located at Bilton by the Asda supermarket, indicating 4 miles to Hull. At the junction of Witham, the viewer looking along Holderness Road at the beginning of the 19th century, the traveller would be met with very much a rural view. Development on the eastern side of the town was confined to Drypool and Witham. Beyond this, Holderness Road ran through open fields. By the first decades of the 19th century, a few buildings had sprung up along the southern tip of Holderness Road, close to the junction with Witham, but these were almost exclusively on the south side and included South Parade and Prospect Place, close to the area then known as Somerstown. This development forms some of the earliest properties on the east side of the River Hull. By the mid-century, Wilton Terrace and Williamson Street were laid out. Quite a desirable area, residents included Isaac Reckitt, the founder of Reckitt & Sons. Many of these dwellings were later converted into shops and businesses. It was also during the 19th century that large swathes of land were acquired further along Holderness Road. Land from Balfour Street to Southcoats Lane was sold off for building. Streets laid out included Morrell Street, Sherburn Street, while further south, Arundel Street and Craven Street were developed. The mid-century had seen considerable building on the south side of Holderness Road up to Craven Street. Field Street had 4 houses in 1851 and acquired its name after the tea dealer William Field. The new railway laid out in 1852, which carried goods from Victoria Dock, led to the development of Waller Street. On the north side, however, development was slower. Land further along the north side was owned by Reverend John Courtney and John Nonabel, which would eventually give name to 2 streets a few decades later. As the century progressed, so too did urban development along Holderness Road. By the 1880s, Studley Street, Courtney Street, Beaton Street, Buckingham Street and Durham Street were laid out and built upon. However, beyond was very much rural farmsteads and fields. By the late 19th century, Holderness Road was increasingly residential. Those that lived along its length, up to its junction with Summergangs and the streets off it, were employed at Victoria Dock or industries at Stone Ferry and Drypool. From the second half of the 19th century, most people living along Holderness Road were either from Hull or Holderness. However, around a third were from further away. Most children, however, were born in Hull with parents that had settled in Hull. Holderness Road did continue to see newcomers from outside the town. Durham Street, for example, residents were from as far afield as Devon, Scotland and even France. From the turn of the 20th century, development had taken place along Holderness Road up to Aberdeen Street and Portobello Street. Several rather well-to-do houses also sprung up. These properties or gentlemen's houses were grouped close to Jallan Street. Woodlands is perhaps the best surviving example, which is now a nursery. Other notable properties include number 346 Holderness Road, which now is behind the facade of the Pramland store and was once home to Thomas Ferrens. Opposite is Chestnut Villa, once home to Alfred Gelder at number 1 and Joseph Rank at number 4. One of the largest developments just off Holderness Road was that of Garden Village. Built by the Reckitt's family for their employees, Garden Village was built between 1907 and the First World War on the former Jalland estate. Also situated on the former Jalland estate is Holderness House. Offset from Holderness Road, its view obscured by trees in the summer months, Holderness House dates from 1838. Originally it was Summergangs Hall, which predated the current building. It is perhaps best known as the home of Thomas Ferrens, who lived there from 1909 until his death in 1930. Today, Holderness House is a residential care home for elderly ladies. Further along Holderness Road on its north side are the engineer streets. Brindley Street takes its name from canal engineer James Brindley. Telford Street takes its name from Scottish civil engineer Thomas Telford, Faraday Street after Michael Faraday, and Kelvin Street after physicist and engineer William Thomson, also known as Lord Kelvin. One of Holderness Road's most well-known landmarks was Craven Park, home of Hulkingston Rovers. The ground was the home of Rovers from 1922 to 1989, before their relocation to the new Craven Park, Preston Road. One of the most prominent features visible from Holderness Road was the totalizer, as shown in this slide. By the First World War, much building had taken place along the length of Holderness Road, up to its junction with Ings Road and beyond. Within the first decade of the 20th century, East Park Avenue and Westminster Avenue were built and largely comprised of 3-bedroomed houses. Shaftesbury and Ellesmere Avenue were built in 1912, while properties in Sharnock Avenue were built in the 1920s. Further along, properties were built along Holderness Road itself during the 1920s and were set back from the road itself, lined with mature trees. What was to become Belfield Avenue was still very much open fields and farms. Belfield Avenue was home to Saltings Farm, while close to its junction with Salthouse Road was Salthouse Farm. Parts of Holderness Road suffered significant bomb damage during the Second World War, particularly Studley Street when a landmine claimed so many lives in Ellis Terrace. Nearby houses continued to be inhabited in the years after the war. Some large-scale clearances took place in and around Holderness Road during the 1960s, most notably the area on its south side from Craven Street to Victor Street. Of all the industries found along Holderness Road, milling dominated much of the 19th century. From Dansom Lane onwards, 11 mills were found along the next mile-and-a-half stretch of Holderness Road. Perhaps the most well-known of these millers were the Rank family. Now the Mill Public House, this was home to the Rank family from 1856 before they moved to Waddingham's Mill in the 1860s. At the time, Waddingham's Mill was offset from Holderness Road, then situated between what is now Holland and Victor Street. Wind eventually gave way to steam. The corn mill was steam powered from the outset in 1838. The building is now a restaurant. It wasn't just milling that offered employment. Residents of Holderness Road were also employed either in the building of Alexandra Dock or at Reckitt's and Sons. Others were employed in the several brickworks found in and around the Holderness Road area. The economic downturn during the 1880s led to some of those unemployed being used in the construction of East Park. Holderness Road witnessed much philanthropy, largely thanks to individuals such as Thomas Ferrens and Sir James Reckitt. East Park opened in 1887, in which Ferrens himself granted land for its later extension, including its boating lake, while, as already mentioned, Garden Village was built by Sir James Reckitt for his employees. The James Reckitt Public Library opened in 1889, and the following year the reference library was added as a gift thanks to Francis Reckitt. Compared to other parts of Hull, few public houses existed along Holderness Road. In fact, churches outnumbered public houses for a time. For anyone travelling from Holderness to Hull, the first public house was the Four Alls, now the Four in Hand. The current Four in Hand was built in 1937 and replaced the earlier public house. The Crown Inn, which stands at the junction of Holderness Road and Summergangs Road, has been the site of an inn since the mid-18th century. The original was a type of cottage with a present building dating from the same time as the Four in Hand. The Elephant and Castle, now fast food outlet, started life as Masson's beer retail shop but soon became the Elephant and Castle and later extended. The widening of Holderness Road led to the demolition of the Nag's Head in 1988. Although today on Witham, Holderness Hotel's original address was Holderness Road. It has occupied the site since 1840 and perhaps earlier. Opposite is the Windmill. Very much a part of the Holderness Road scene, it probably takes its name from the former mill next door, which was run by the Tynegates in 1814. Holderness Road had several cinemas. The Dreadnought was the oldest on Holderness Road and opened in 1910. The Picture Dome was located on the corner of Brazil Street. In 1928 it became the Ritz Cinema, reputedly then Hull's most up-to-date cinema. Its seating was increased from 600 to 1600, but sadly bombed in July 1941. The Savoy on the corner of Morrill Street opened in 1923, but was damaged during a raid which hit the Holland Street and Sherburn Street area. It was later pulled down and the site is now occupied by the Boys Store, which opened in 1961. The Astoria stands on the corner of Lakeview and Holderness Road. In the early 1930s the site was a paddock before the Astoria opened. It is still in use today as a bingo hall. The major density of shops on Holderness Road begins from Southcoats Lane. However, in the 1930s private houses still fronted this section of Holderness Road. It was during the decade that the jostle for shop space began to develop. Shops that sold foodstuffs were the most populous. William Jackson and Son, along with William Cousins, had shops on Holderness Road. The Co-op had a store near Holland Street, with another close to the Crown Inn and a third further along at the corner of Shaftesbury Avenue. Woolworths opened its store on Holderness Road in 1937. Individual shops have flourished along Holderness Road up to the junction with Ings Road and Maybury Road. Today, a variety of shops can still be found along Holderness Road. Although the main shopping district lays between the new Mount Pleasant Retail Park and Southcoats Lane, shops can be found all the way down to its junction with Witham, while at a mixture of residential properties and shops, and other small businesses front Holderness Road beyond Southcoats Lane to its junction with Ings Road. Today, Holderness Road is woven into the fabric of East Hull. Together with Hessel Road and Beverley Road, it is one of the major arterial routes into the city. It is home to thousands of Hull's residents and remains popular among shoppers from across the city. Thanks for watching.